we just want to bring you breaking news coming from Morwell, from a court there in Victoria, Australia, where the jury has come to a verdict in the case of Erin Patterson. Just to remind you, Erin Patterson has been charged with the murder of 3 of her relatives and the attempted murder of another by serving them in 2023, July of that year, with a meal, a beef Wellington that contained death cap mushrooms. The trial has been going on for many weeks at the court in Morwell, Victoria, captivating Australia as a nation, but also, of course, our global audience as we have covered this trial. So the Australian woman is been found guilty of 3 counts of murder and 1 of attempted murder. That is the verdict of the jury, which has just come through. Of course, she pleaded not guilty to all the counts against her. It's been an extraordinary case. Erin Patterson, 50 years old, of course, we'll be hearing later about her sentencing. What does she face in terms of time behind bars? But as we could just confirm to you, she has been found guilty of the first count of murder in the mushroom death case, and she has been found guilty of 3 counts and 1 of attempted murder. So the conclusion has come through from the jury. So we're going to be joining our correspondent. She's in the courtroom right now, so as soon as she can come outside to talk us through the verdict, we will discuss this with her. You're with BBC News. Of course, this trial, as I've mentioned, has been ongoing for many, many weeks, where we heard both those who were the person who survived the meal, who was extremely ill after this dinner. The prosecution argued in the case that she, Mrs Patterson, knowingly put toxic death cap mushrooms into a home-cooked meal before lying to police and then disposing of any evidence afterwards. The defence argued that she accidentally included the poisonous fungi in a dish and only lied because she panicked afterwards that people she loved had been hurt. It was her in-laws, Ms Patterson's in-laws, Don and Gail Patterson, both 70 years old, along with Gail's sister Heather Wilkinson, 66, who fell ill and then died days later after the lunch. Let's bring you a backgrounder on this case for you, just to remind you what it is about, from our correspondent, Katie Watson.
I'm devastated. I love them. And I can't believe that this has happened, and I'm so sorry.
Erin Patterson made out it was all a terrible accident.
How are you,
I just can't believe it.
And throughout the trial, she kept up the charade. But the jury just didn't believe her. It was here that Erin Patterson murdered 3 of her relatives and attempted to kill a 4th. Her home in Leongatha, a 2-hour drive from Melbourne, a house she'd built with a generous inheritance. She'd invited her in-laws, Don and Gail Patterson, for lunch. Also sat around her kitchen table were Gail's sister, Heather Wilkinson, and her husband, Ian. He was the only survivor and gave evidence at this trial. So too did Patterson's estranged husband, Simon. He'd also been invited to the lunch, but decided not to go, saying he felt uncomfortable. Erin Patterson was originally accused of attempting to murder him as well, on 3 occasions. Those charges were dropped ahead of the trial. Erin Patterson had lured the guests to her house on the pretence of a cancer diagnosis. That was a lie. On the menu, individual beef Wellingtons, a recipe chosen from one of Australia's best-loved cookbooks, only with an alternative ingredient, death cap mushrooms. Hours later, the guests fell ill and rapidly got sicker. Within days, Don, Gail and Heather were dead.
From the very beginning of this murder trial, it was made clear to the jury that there was no dispute that Erin Patterson used death cap mushrooms in preparing her beef Wellington. The question was whether she knowingly used them to poison her relatives. The prosecution said she intended to kill, and the jury agreed.
It was suggested to the jury that Erin Patterson had logged on to this citizen science website, where she found 2 sightings of death cap mushrooms growing locally. Phone records indicated she may have then travelled to those areas, first to this park, and weeks later to this street, where toxic mushrooms were also spotted. The assumption being that she foraged for them here, the murder weapon she hid inside the beef Wellington. While her relatives lay dying, Erin Patterson was covering her tracks, caught on CCTV at this tip, discarding a dehydrator she used to prepare the mushrooms. Erin Patterson was accused of telling so many lies it was hard to keep track of them. In court, she claimed to have worried that deadly foraged mushrooms had got into the meal by accident, but had stayed quiet. "You told police you loved Don and Gail," the prosecutor put to her during cross-examination. "Surely if you'd loved them, then you would have immediately notified the medical authorities. Instead, you got up, drove your children to school, and then came home, and then you got rid of the dehydrator." For 8 days, Erin Patterson was in the witness box. She disputed a lot of the evidence. She quibbled over the detail. At times, it was tense in court. At one point, the prosecutor asked her, "Are you making this up as you go along, Ms Patterson?" The jury also saw through her lies. A fan of true crime, Erin Patterson, who was dubbed the Mushroom Cook, became the focus of one of Australia's most high-profile murder investigations. This rural part of Victoria, normally a quiet, close-knit community, thrust into the global spotlight by this now infamous case. And a family whose lives revolved around the local church, torn apart. Tucked away in the local graveyard, a reminder of that loss. Victims of a daughter-in-law whose motive might never be known. Katie Watson, BBC News, in Morwell, Victoria.
And just to let you know, the breaking news in this hour that Erin Patterson, the Australian woman who you were just hearing about in that report from Katie, has been found guilty of 3 counts of murder and 1 of attempted murder. So the jury has just delivered its verdict in that courtroom in Morwell, Victoria. And we'll be talking to my colleague Shaima Khalil in just a moment. She has just exited the courthouse where she heard that verdict deliver. Let's talk to Shaima now. Shaima, she has been found guilty on all charges, is that correct?
That's right, the verdict is in, and the jury has found Erin Patterson guilty on all charges. I was just in the room when it was announced. The jury member has been asked if the jury found Erin Patterson guilty of the attempted murder of Ian Wilkinson. They said guilty, and the murder of Don and Gail Patterson. She was guilty of those charges, and the murder of Heather Wilkinson. And they said she was guilty on all charges. This, of course, relating to that fatal lunch that she had invited her relatives for 2 years ago, almost to the day. She had said that she wanted this meal to be special, but in that beef Wellington that she served her relatives were toxic mushrooms, death cap mushrooms, poisonous fungi that the prosecution had argued that she had deliberately foraged for and deliberately served to her family. Throughout the trial, Erin Patterson had argued this was all a terrible accident, that she did not mean to kill her family. Something is happening behind us now. I think these are family members.
Just Shaima, was Erin Patterson in the
visibly
courtroom?
Quite emotional.
I'm sure. Can you just tell us, was Erin Patterson in the courtroom to hear that verdict?
Yes, Erin Patterson was actually sitting just behind me, a row behind me, and to see her, you kind of had to turn around and look. And throughout the readings of those verdicts, I was looking her way, and she had a blank look on her face, almost expressionless. She kept her eye dead on the jury. She looked straight into their direction and heard every guilty verdict as it was being read out. Again, no expression. There was a bit of exchange before the verdict between her and her counsel and her lawyers. She seemed to be smiling at different points of that conversation. But once that moment happened, once everybody sat down and you could hear a pin drop in that courtroom, and it's not a very big courtroom, Erin was just looking straight at the jury as they announced their verdict, guilty on all charges. This is a case that has gripped Australia. I just want to Just to give you a sense of what's happening around me, look at the amount of media attention right here. We are surrounded by different media outlets, Australian, from outside the country, because this is really a case that has not only grabbed the attention of this country and gripped Australia, with different people forming lines at different points of this trial, trying to get in and get a glimpse of what was happening in the court. But it also grabbed global headlines. And for more than 2 months, hearing evidence, hearing testimonies from more than 50 witnesses, including Ian Wilkinson, who is the only survivor of that lunch, including Erin Patterson herself, who decided that she was going to be in the witness stand as the only defense witness. It happened, it was unfolding in front of everyone for 2 months, and after a week of deliberation, exactly because that's when the jury sat last Monday, after exactly a week, they came up with their verdict. They found that she was guilty, that she had deliberately used those toxic mushrooms as a murder weapon to kill her relatives, her in-laws, Gail and Dawn Patterson, the parents of her estranged husband, Simon Patterson, Gail's sister, Heather Wilkinson, and the attempted murder of Ian Wilkinson, the local pastor in Leongatha, that small, sleepy town in regional Victoria that has been pushed into the spotlight because of Erin Patterson's crime.
And Shaima, do we know when the sentencing will be, and what she's likely to be facing in terms of a prison sentence, we assume?
Yep. So procedurally, what happens next is that Erin Patterson has exactly 28 days, up to 28 days, to appeal against her conviction. And then it's up to the appeals court to grant her that. If granted, then it would be heard in front of a court of appeal. When we were in the room, there were talks about what was going to happen next, but procedurally, you've got 28 days now. And because of those 28 days, there are actually suppression orders about what it is that can be reportable. The fact that you still, in a way, can only report what the court has heard, nothing from the pre-trial yet, until she files for that appeal, or her lawyers file for that appeal, and then it's granted.
And there's no word from her team yet, I'm guessing. Of course, they have to digest the verdict of the jury, but I assume it'd be fairly soon, if they do decide to appeal, that we'll hear about that.
That's right, and that's the thing. It's about then what happens if and when they decide to appeal. When we hear from their defense, then you get more legal procedures, essentially, in the appeals court. How long this is going to take, it's very, very difficult to determine right now. But I think if I can describe the atmosphere around me at the moment, it is quite charged. I mean, everyone in that courtroom, Sally, was silent, but everyone was just on the edge of their seats, quite literally. I could see it. And everyone tried to turn around and get a glimpse of Erin Patterson. And right now, this crowd of journalists is just looking out to see if, for example, there is a lawyer or a family member. But everyone is digesting what they've waited more than 2 months. Well, actually, since the story broke 2 years ago, this is the verdict that everyone has been waiting to hear, what is going to happen, how this case is going to end. But I must say that, just really quickly, at the heart of this, away from the court, away from the judge and the jury, this is a family's tragedy. There are grandparents that loved Erin's children, their grandchildren, and they were killed by their daughter-in-law with a motive that may never be known.